This is the brief on how to build products that click using the Foundation Sprint system. So, you know how frustrating it is when products just flop after wasting months of development time? Well, this system, it's a super quick, time-boxed approach designed to turn those kind of ambiguous ideas into something solid. A single, testable belief, what they call the founding hypothesis, that really helps guarantee product customer fit. Okay, first up, intense focus. Seriously, this system demands that teams drop everything else. No context switching, no emails, no random meetings. The authors actually call it declaring a good emergency, right? Just look at the Google Meet team. They apparently crunched like a year and a half of chaotic planning down into a working prototype in just 1 week. Wild. Right. So once you've got that intense focus, the next really critical step is making sure you're aiming at the right thing, nailing the founding hypothesis. Before you commit resources, you have to clearly define the basics. Customer, problem, your team's advantage, and the competition, so you can figure out how you'll be radically different. Think about Nike's Air Jordans. They didn't just try to compete with Converse on budget or coolness. Nope. They created a whole new framework with that unprecedented signature deal. Change the game. And finally, number 3. Forget building for months. Test and iterate with tiny loops. Look, a strategy is just a hypothesis, right? Until customers actually prove it works. So instead of those big, slow, minimum viable products, teams use design sprints to create realistic, non-functional prototypes, basically fakes, just to get genuine customer reactions within days. This super rapid feedback let teams, like this company Phaedra, pivot and adjust their whole solution in mere hours, not quarters. So yeah, successful teams treat their strategy not as some permanent plan, but really as a flexible, testable hypothesis that's always ready for rapid iteration.
Commercial bakeries can benefit from the additional working capital factoring can provide. Contact Chris Lehnes at Versant Funding to learn if your client is a factoring fit.
Welcome to the debate. Our focus today is on, the strategic bedrock of innovation. These modern methodologies, systematic high-speed approaches, generally known as sprints. We're really digging into whether this rigorous, structured way of doing things, from the strategic foundation sprint right through to the later design sprints focused on testing, is inherently superior. Is it more reliable for guaranteeing a successful product foundation?
Right.
The central question, I think, is this. Is this systematic sprint methodology the necessary path? The reliable way to bypass all that organizational inertia, those psychological traps we fall into? Or actually, is its effectiveness ultimately secondary to, the quality of the initial inputs, the unique talent, the market insight, the timing?
Yeah, that's the core tension.
My position is pretty firm. This systematic methodology is, I believe, absolutely necessary. It's the essential guardrail. It successfully bypasses that predictable organizational chaos, those debilitating human cognitive biases, and it ensures a de-risked strategy and really high-fidelity testing.
And I come at it from a slightly different angle. While I totally agree that these sprint frameworks are fantastic tools for accelerating testing, increasing efficiency, I fundamentally see them as execution frameworks, not creation engines. The success of a product's foundation, I think, ultimately hinges on unique inherent advantages, things like capability you can't just replicate, deep market insight, that relentless motivation. The system can certainly measure and speed things up, I grant that, but it can't conjure these things up, and it definitely can't guarantee that tricky variable of market timing.
Okay, so let's start with the huge problem that the sprint methodology actually solves: chaos and stasis. Innovation doesn't usually fail because the team lacks a good idea or, smart people. It fails mostly due to organizational chaos. Those endless meetings, the political fights over resources, the perpetual slide decks, and, crucially, our predictable cognitive biases. We're all prone to anchoring bias, falling for the first idea, confirmation bias, seeking only data that supports our hunch, and overconfidence. They are the real enemies of progress. The foundation sprint is like the direct antidote here.
It attacks that stasis by compressing what typically becomes 6 months, maybe more, of slow, meandering strategy development, often involving like 5 different departments, endless email chains, into a focused 10 hours of collaborative decision-making. The reliability is sort of baked into the mechanism. It forces absolute focus, clearing the calendar to drop everything and sprint on the most important strategic challenge. We saw this exact dynamic at Google when teams were trying to launch what eventually became Google Meet. That project was just mired in chaos, political stagnation for, a year and a half? They couldn't get consensus, couldn't get momentum. It wasn't until a week of focused, systematic sprinting that they produced a simple, working prototype that immediately just clicked with users.
The process forces clarity on the basics, the customer, the definitive problem, clear differentiation, the competition, and it demands the team moves from just a vague hunch to a clear, testable founding hypothesis. This hypothesis, that specific claim linking a customer, a problem, and a proposed solution, is really the atomic building block of a great product, and the system ensures it's built correctly, efficiently.
That's a powerful argument for efficiency, for fighting that organizational entropy. But I guess I'd frame the causality a bit differently. I mean, sure, if you put capable people into a highly structured, focused environment, they will execute quickly. But the sprint framework, powerful as it is, it just cannot substitute for the critical inputs, that deep expertise, the unique market insight. A system can't just conjure a breakthrough idea if the talent fundamentally isn't there.
Okay.
The big successes often cited, like Phaedra, that AI for industrial plants, they actually reinforce the primacy of these inherent advantages, I think. Their breakthrough didn't start with a framework. It started with a confluence of unique talents. You can almost put it in a formula. Capability plus insight plus motivation equals unique advantage. The founders had expertise you just couldn't replicate. Jim's specialized knowledge of data centers, Veda's cutting-edge AI skills, and Katie's deep operational insight into industrial plants. These specific, rare advantages made their solution possible. The sprint accelerated their path to testing, absolutely, 100%, but it didn't create the solution itself or that unique cross-functional knowledge needed to even conceive of it in the first place. Furthermore, relying too heavily on the process, well, it risks systemizing mediocrity or, even worse, maybe prematurely simplifying really complex ideas. The methodology puts huge emphasis on the founding hypothesis, right? Yet we have to remember the central lesson. It's just a guess. It's almost certainly wrong. Accelerating the discovery of failure through sprints is hugely valuable, no question, but the foundational non-systemic insight, that initial correct direction, maybe, that allows for the eventual right pivot, that has to already exist within the team's inherent strengths.
I see why you think that, focusing on the quality of the inputs, but I'd argue the system is designed precisely to protect those valuable inputs from their own inherent flaws. You mentioned smart people. The key organizational failure isn't a lack of smart people. It's smart people falling victim to their own biases, especially that trap of falling in love with their first, most comfortable idea. Our methodology is the tool that ensures, rational evidence-based decision-making by forcing teams to consider conflicting opinions before you commit to an approach. Take tools like magic lenses. They're a perfect systemic counter to anchoring bias. Instead of letting the senior leader's favorite idea dominate everything, the system structures the argument. It forces the team to view options through contradictory perspectives. The pragmatic lens, the growth lens, the money lens.
This mechanism forces genuine structured conflict, and it overcomes the tendency of unstructured group brainstorms to just yield, mediocre consensus. It's designed to create a productive team of rivals scenario, preventing that comfortable majority opinion from just taking over before resources are actually committed.
I agree that magic lenses and other ranking frameworks are an incredibly useful simulation of conflict. They really are. They're an elegant way to impose intellectual discipline, expand our limited working memory by clearly visualizing conflicting criteria on, say, a 2x2 matrix. But it is fundamentally a controlled, kind of artificial environment. It's designed to accelerate agreement and momentum towards a testable hypothesis.
Right, towards action.
Exactly. But the risk remains, I think, in dismissing true rigorous challenge, or maybe overlooking those radical long-term visionary ideas that initially just seem absurd. If the system constantly prioritizes realistic optimism and immediate clarity, which, okay, is necessary for a rapid sprint test, aren't we maybe prematurely cutting off the development of truly audacious visions? Consider that very early complicated idea for Google Meet, the 3D virtual conference room. That got set aside, right, in favor of the much simpler, pragmatic solution, which was tactically the correct choice then. But the systemic pressure for immediate clarity can easily dismiss projects that just need ambiguity, need time to mature. The acceleration solves a tactical execution problem, sure, but it risks missing a strategic long-term opportunity simply because it doesn't score well through that immediate pragmatic lens.
But that acceleration is vital precisely because time is the greatest enemy of the ambitious project. We're all subject to Jake's laws of project motion. Ambitious projects take at least a year or twice as long as planned, whichever is greater. That feels true, doesn't it? The system mandates that teams experiment with tiny loops until your solution clicks. The 5-day design sprint, it's the ultimate time machine. It bypasses those long, resource-draining loops by moving from idea to tested prototype in a week. This de-risks the product idea incredibly efficiently. Let's go back to Phaedra for a second. They were building incredibly complex AI software, a project that should take many months, maybe a year of engineering resources. But they quickly tested a non-functional dashboard prototype with actual industrial plant engineers. And crucially, that initial version failed. The engineers couldn't trust it, there wasn't enough transparency in the AI's decisions. This failure proved their founding hypothesis was wrong before a single line of production code was deployed. Those tiny loops allowed them to pivot quickly, efficiently, saving potentially millions in wasted development.
The value of rapid learning, de-risking, it's undeniable, absolutely. But we do need to maintain some definitional precision here. The design sprint efficiently de-risks the product idea, yes, by testing mock-ups, prototypes with individuals, often in a lab setting. However, the ability to test prototypes with a handful of people doesn't fully equate to finding product-market fit. That's the real foundational success, right? And it requires real customers spending real time and real money in a dynamic, competitive market. The sprint provides a powerful signal about usability, about desire, yes, but it remains a simulation, not the market itself.
Okay, a simulation, but a very informative one.
True, but the material itself gives a strong counterpoint regarding market inertia. Think about that carbon accounting startup that meticulously used the sprint methodology. They clearly define their competitor using the system, identifying it as their potential customers, basically doing nothing and feeling bad about it. They had definition, they had differentiation, but the startup ultimately failed. They learned the hard way that do nothing and feel bad about it was an incredibly entrenched and difficult competitor to beat. The system articulated the ideal strategy, the differentiation, perfectly. But it couldn't overcome market inertia or force customers to care enough to change behavior. The fundamental market readiness just wasn't there, a factor completely external to how good the process was.
I absolutely concede that the market is the final judge, no question. But the methodology dramatically increases the probability of passing that final judgment by ensuring radical differentiation right from the start. And that's necessary for overcoming the kind of inertia you just described. The system requires teams to proactively identify factors that matter most to customers and focus only on what they can uniquely deliver, often visualized on a 2x2 chart that conceptually pushes the competition into, well, what we call loserville. This systematic, mandated strategic charting forces genuine ambition. It forces the team to look beyond just incremental improvements. Slack's success is a perfect example of this disciplined structure meeting ambition. They didn't position themselves against niche messaging competitors like, IRC or HipChat back then. No, they picked the 800-pound gorilla email and focused intensely on being radically better on the factors that mattered to their users, teamwork, and fun. They used the principles laid out in their mini manifesto to reinforce that promise. This disciplined structure ensures that the ambition, which is that unique advantage you value, is channeled toward a clear, actionable, and most importantly, testable separation from the status quo. The methodology is the essential delivery system for that radical differentiation.
Delivery is only useful if the initial package, the core idea, is viable. Differentiation is only powerful if it addresses an existing, solvable problem with a fundamentally valid solution. The structure provides the tools, the mini-manifesto, the 2x2 chart, those principles like Phaedra's empower, don't replace, to articulate differentiation with, yes, perfect clarity. But it cannot guarantee the initial underlying insight is actually sound. This docile example of the astronomer Urbain Le Verrier is, I think, highly instructive here. After he correctly predicted Neptune using rigorous calculation, he became obsessed with finding the invisible, non-existent planet Vulcan. He dedicated, 18 years to this search? His methodology was correct, his math was sound, but his conviction about his hypothesis that his new solution was radically better than others, it blinded him to reality. Einstein's relativity eventually explained Mercury's orbital anomalies, not Vulcan. The conviction, amplified by self-serving biases, confirmation bias, meant the initial wrong guess was just never dropped. The sprint system, if it's not handled with profound intellectual humility, could merely give a team a powerful, hyper-organized set of tools to pursue their own personal Vulcan with maximum efficiency. True success hinges on the initial insight being valid and the market being ready, factors which are entirely external to the rigor of the sprint itself.
And that brings us right back full circle to the problem of human frailty, doesn't it? The systematic sprint approach provides the essential structure, the focus, the methodology required to bypass precisely those organizational and psychological pitfalls you highlight, including Le Verrier's kind of self-deception. By forcing rapid, low-fidelity testing of a rigorously defined founding hypothesis, it dramatically increases the probability that ambitious projects efficiently find the path that actually clicks. We see this in major successes that transition quickly from chaos to clarity, like Slack, like Flatiron Health. The process is the necessary guardrail against that very human tendency to fall into confirmation bias and organizational stasis.
I agree. The system is a crucial accelerator. It's a powerful tool for rapid adjustment. It definitely cures organizational chaos and makes teams hyper-efficient, no doubt. But the ultimate, perhaps irreducible determinants of a product's successful foundation remain, for me, external. The inherent strength of the team's unique capabilities, the quality of their initial market insight, and crucially, favorable market conditions. The system is superb at identifying the correct move and executing it quickly. But the talent and the timing, they have to already be on the board, so to speak. The process is a necessary tool for survival, maybe, but not a substitute for market genius or that foundational advantage.
A fascinating distinction there between maximizing effort and actually guaranteeing insight. This debate, I think, clearly highlights that enduring product success involves a delicate balance. There's the absolute necessity of disciplined structure to maximize focused, de-risked effort. And then there's the reliance on those pre-existing foundational advantages to ensure that focused effort is actually directed toward a truly valuable, timely solution. Clearly, there's much more to explore in how these powerful systems interact with the complex reality of human genius and unpredictable markets.
Factoring can meet the cash needs of energy companies looking to expand. Contact Chris at Versant Funding to learn if your energy client is a factoring fit.
We all know that feeling, don't we? You pour weeks, maybe months, sometimes even years of passion, research, your energy into a new project, a product, a service, whatever it is, and then you launch it and, well, nothing, just crickets. It's kind of baffling. Why do most new ideas, even the really smart ones, just fizzle out? Why do we spend so much time building stuff people don't actually want?
Yeah, it's that pain of a huge strategic mistake, and it's just demoralizing, frankly. But, the really successful companies, think Google, top startups in the Valley, they didn't just get lucky. They didn't guess. They actually built up a rigorous, proven system to cut through that chaos, to get past our own biases.
Right, and that's exactly what we want to dive into today, that system. It's almost like a shortcut, designed to make sure you build something that people don't just, like, but something that really clicks.
That click is absolutely everything. It's that perfect resonance, and a product only gets that click if it pulls off three things at once. First, it absolutely has to solve a problem that matters to people, a real pain point. Second, it needs to stand out, and I mean radically stand out from all the other options they have. And third, this is crucial, it has to just make sense to people, like instantly.
Yeah.
They have to get it. Miss any one of those, you've got a dud on your hands.
Okay, so where did this disciplined way of thinking come from? I guess like a lot of good ideas, it started with a failure, right? A
Yeah.
pretty painful one.
Exactly. It's a great cautionary tale, actually. Picture this. 1993. Someone spends an entire year totally isolated building this huge, complex swords and sorcery game, a castle adventure, kept it totally secret, finally gets the code compiled, puts it on a floppy disk, remember those, and hands it to his most trusted but also most brutally honest friend, Ian.
Oh boy, the moment of truth.
Totally. So Ian starts playing, finds a torch, gets a dagger, wanders around the castle for maybe 5 minutes,
Yeah.
and then just leans back, says, and slides the keyboard away.
Oof. That's it.
That's it. Then the other friend there, Matt, gives it a go, gets killed by a giant spider almost immediately.
Ah.
And instead of restarting, he just stands up and says, hey, let's go shoot some hoops.
Wow. Okay, I love that story because that's the pivot point, isn't it? The realization wasn't, oh, the game has bugs.
Not at all.
It was, my product isn't just competing with other computer games like Solitaire or whatever.
Mhm.
It's competing against everything else that could grab their attention.
Precisely. Basketball. Listening to a new tape on their Walkman, even just like walking down the street to grab a corn dog from the island market, that's your real competition.
That's a huge mental shift, understanding the true scope of competition.
It's foundational to this whole system. The big takeaway was, look, we cannot risk another whole year building something massive and secret. So instead, the creators started doing these weekly experiments.
Bringing in tiny prototypes every Friday.
Yeah, just little game ideas. And they kept failing week after week until he brought in one called Mealy Mouse.
And that one?
That one clicked. Instantly. The friends leaned right in, started talking trash to each other, playing against each other. Even their math teacher, Mr. Fleck, saw it and asked if he could have a turn.
That's the signal, that immediate engagement.
That's it. And it proves the fundamental rule here. Success demands constant, cheap experimentation. We call them tiny loops. You test and iterate on the solution until you find that click before you pour resources into the full build.
Okay, but just waiting for that Mealy Mouse moment every Friday still sounds a bit chaotic, maybe lucky. So the modern system puts structure around that, right? Starting with something called the foundation sprint.
Exactly. The foundation sprint is designed to be hyper-focused. You basically drop everything else and sprint on the most critical challenge, locking down your core strategy.
And you're saying this compresses, what, like 6 months of normal strategy work?
Pretty much. 6 months of endless meetings, slide decks, debates, all boiled down into about 10 focused hours over 2 days. And we do it using specific tools and structures, not just talking. Things like heat map voting, structured decision frames. It forces rapid alignment on day one.
Okay, day one. So what are those basics? You said that they're kind of non-obvious basics.
Yeah, it starts with really nailing down your customer and the problem. Crystal clarity here is vital. You want to avoid that trap, like in the movie Big. Remember the toy executive pushing the skyscraper robot?
Oh, yeah. Based on market share goals, not what kids actually find fun.
Exactly. The customer has to be your honored guest and the problem. It needs to be concrete, a real pain. Think about the early Google Meet team. Their problem wasn't some abstract concept. It was simple. Multi-way video calls were a total pain. Software installs, plugins, crashing. Just frustrating.
Right, the common sense test. Is this a real issue for a real person?
That's the baseline. Once you have that pain clearly defined, you move on to your team's unique advantage. What do you bring to the table that others can't easily copy? And the system breaks this down into 3 sort of key ingredients.
Okay, what are those?
So first, you need capability. What does your team do exceptionally well? For Phaedra, that AI industrial startup, it was this blend of like deep AI expertise and serious mechanical engineering know-how.
Okay, skills. What's next?
Second is motivation. Why do you specifically care about this problem? Often it comes from frustration. Like Jim Gao at Google, he was deeply frustrated by how insanely inefficient data centers were. That personal drive matters.
Interesting. Does it always have to be frustration? Or can it be just seeing a cool opportunity?
It can start with opportunity, sure, but the motivation that really sustains you, that pushes you through the inevitable hard times, that often comes from having personally felt the pain of the current way things are done. It gives the whole effort a kind of soul.
Right, it's personal. And the third ingredient?
The third is insight. This is about a deep, unique understanding of the domain. For Phaedra, again, Katie, one of the founders, had worked in industrial plants. She knew how they actually operated day to day, not just the theory. So, capability plus motivation plus insight, that combination is your unique advantage, your shield.
Okay, that framework makes a lot of sense. So you've got your problem, your customer, your unique advantage. Now you have to look outwards at the competition. How do you make sure you're seeing the real rivals, not just the obvious ones?
Yeah, this is key. We use a structured exercise called Note and Vote. Everyone on the team quickly brainstorms all possible competitors. Then you vote on the most significant ones. And it's not just direct competitors like, a Converse and Adidas versus Nike.
Different, broader.
Much broader. You have to identify the substitutes. For Phaedra, a huge substitute wasn't another AI company. It was those highly paid plant engineers manually tweaking the systems all day.
Yeah.
That's a powerful incumbent solution.
And then there's the option of just doing nothing, sticking with the status quo. That feels like the sneakiest competitor.
Yeah. It's often the biggest hurdle. Customers might feel the pain, but the effort required to switch just seems too high, so they tolerate it. Do nothing is a massive competitor.
So how do you position yourself against all that?
Well, the advice is often, go for the gorilla. Pick the biggest, baddest competitor you can realistically challenge. Think about Slack. They didn't position themselves against other chat apps initially. They went straight after the giant, email.
But hang on, isn't that super risky? Why pick the hardest fight right out of the gate? Why not find a smaller niche you can dominate first?
Because tackling the biggest problem, the biggest competitor, forces you to create something truly radically different, something so much better than the existing dominant solution that it completely changes the game. If you aim for just a small improvement, you likely won't overcome people's inertia. You need that radical separation, which brings us perfectly to differentiation. This is the absolute core of why a customer will bother to change, why they'll pay the cost. And that cost isn't just money, it's time, effort, risk, mental energy. So the differentiation can't be slight. It has to be radical.
You mentioned Google Meet earlier. That seems like a classic example, right? They were up against giants like Skype and Tandberg back in '09. Those guys had way better video quality, bigger networks.
Exactly. And the Meet team knew they couldn't win on those fronts immediately, so they deliberately ignored video quality and network size. Instead, they leveraged their strength web software to offer two game-changing differentiators.
Like who are?
Just a browser, no installs needed, and simple, easy, multi-way calling. That focus on ease of use, where the incumbents were clunky, created an instant wedge in the market.
Okay, so you identify those top one or two differentiators. What then? How does that become strategy?
Those become your mini manifesto, and you translate them into a powerful visual tool, the 2x2 chart. Now, since you can't see it, imagine drawing a cross on a page. The vertical axis is one differentiator, say, ease of setup for Google Meet. The horizontal is the other, maybe multi-way reliability.
Got it, like a standard business matrix.
Right. But the key is you position your solution in that top right box where you're strong on both axes you've chosen. And by picking those specific axes where you excel, you automatically force your competitors into the other three boxes. That L shape of, well, Loserville.
Ah, so it visually highlights your unique strengths relative to the competition on the factors that matter most to your strategy.
Exactly. But you have to be brutally honest here. It has to reflect reality from the customer's perspective, not just your marketing hopes. Then, the final step is to turn those differentiators into three practical, actionable principles that guide every decision the team makes.
This is lesson 6, right? That structure. Differentiate, safeguard. Can you give an example?
Yeah, Phaedra is perfect here. Their first two principles were likely about energy savings and system optimization, their core differentiators. But their third, the crucial safeguard principle, was empower, don't replace.
Addressing the fear factor for the engineers whose jobs might seem threatened by AI.
Precisely. It was a clear commitment. Our AI makes you better at your job. It doesn't eliminate it. That principle built the trust they absolutely needed for those engineers to even consider adopting the system. It's about anticipating and neutralizing the biggest adoption barriers.
Yeah.
Okay, so that wraps up day 1, defining the strategy. Day 2 shifts gears into strategic action, but maybe not how you'd expect. The morning starts with lesson 7. the pre-pivot.
Pre-pivot. So pivoting before you've even built anything.
Exactly. The goal is to deliberately stop and brainstorm alternatives to your first favorite idea before you get emotionally invested in building it.
Makes sense. Is there a story behind that one?
Yeah, the founders of Genius Loci. Their initial idea was pretty cool. A GPS-based app to help people find hidden, interesting spots in the Swiss countryside. Polished concept.
Sounds neat. What was the issue?
Well, they forced themselves to generate alternatives. And when they really thought about the context people using this app out in the middle of nowhere, they realized a GPS app is actually really fragile. What happens when the signal drops?
Ah, right. Suddenly useless.
Totally. But one of their alternatives was much simpler. A basic website combined with physical signs at the locations, maybe with a QR code, much more robust, much more reliable in that specific environment. Making that choice took maybe 2 hours in the sprint, but it likely saved them months of building an app that would have failed in its core use case.
Wow. Okay, so how do you make that kind of rational decision quickly, especially when teams tend to fall in love with their first idea?
That's where lesson 8 comes in. Magic lenses. We all have biases, right? Confirmation bias, groupthink. Teams naturally rally around one idea. So this technique forces you to adopt conflicting viewpoints simultaneously. Think of Abraham Lincoln deliberately having a team of rivals in his cabinet.
Okay, so how does it work in practice? Lenses.
You take your top few alternative ideas, say the GPS app versus the website signs for Genius Loci. Then you evaluate them rapidly across multiple 2x2 charts. But the axes change for each chart based on a different lens.
What kind of lenses?
Common ones are customer lens, which option delivers the most value? Pragmatic lens, which is most feasible to build and maintain, growth lens, which scales fastest, and money lens, which gets to profitability quickest.
I see. So the Genius Loci team might run their options through those. The GPS app might look good on growth, but maybe the website plus signs option looks consistently stronger across customer, pragmatic, and money, especially when you add a middle-of-nowhere reliability lens.
Exactly. It forces you to argue against your own preferences, to see the trade-offs clearly, and make a decision based on a holistic view, not just gut feeling or the coolest tech.
That's clever. But even with all that structure, I guess we're still human, still prone to error.
Oh, absolutely. Which leads us to lesson 9, beware the Vulcan mistake. This is a fantastic story about cognitive bias. Urbain Le Verrier was the astronomer who brilliantly predicted the existence of Neptune based on math alone. A genius.
Right, so what was the mistake?
After discovering Neptune, he became convinced there was another planet, Vulcan, orbiting even closer to the Sun to explain some anomalies in Mercury's orbit. He spent the next 18 years obsessively searching for Vulcan, ignoring mounting evidence against it. He was anchored to his initial hypothesis, overconfident in his own brilliance. Vulcan, of course, doesn't exist.
He just couldn't let go of his idea, even when the data didn't fit. We all do that, don't we?
We're wired for it. That's why the output of this whole foundation sprint process isn't called a plan. A plan feels fixed, like a commitment carved in stone.
So what is it called?
It's called a founding hypothesis.
Okay, hypothesis. But isn't that just like a softer word for a plan? How does changing the name help us avoid being like Le Verrier?
It's a crucial mindset shift. A plan implies execute this. A hypothesis implies test this. It's meant to be potentially proven wrong. It forces you to think like Einstein, who was willing to adjust his theories when new evidence came along, not like Le Verrier, who chased a ghost because he couldn't admit he might be wrong. The hypothesis is your starting point for learning, not your final destination.
Okay, I get that. It frames the next steps as experiments, not just execution. So does this hypothesis get summarized somehow?
Yes. It culminates in the core statement. It's like a Mad Lib sentence that pulls everything together. We believe our target customer will choose our specific approach or solution over the main competition or substitute because our key differentiation.
That's really concise, puts a whole strategy into one testable sentence.
Exactly. And the only way to actually prove or disprove that hypothesis isn't more meetings or analysis. It's through those tiny loops we talked about earlier, the experiments. Lesson 10.
Right, back to the prototypes and testing, like with Phaedra.
Perfect example. They had their founding hypothesis about AI optimizing industrial plants. They didn't spend 6 months building the full AI. They ran a 1-week design sprint and built a realistic prototype, basically. A fake but convincing dashboard showing what the AI autopilot would do.
And they tested that on real plant engineers.
Yep. And that first prototype kind of failed. It showed the optimized settings, the result, but it didn't show how the AI got there. It wasn't transparent.
What was the reaction?
Polite interest. That looks interesting. But nobody was leaning in. Nobody was excited. It lacked trust.
So they didn't give up, they iterated.
Immediately, they ran a second sprint the very next week, built a new prototype. This one included a detailed timeline showing exactly what actions the AI was taking, what data it was seeing, what it predicted would happen, transparency.
And the reaction this time?
Night and day. The engineers leaned right forward. They started asking super detailed questions. How does it connect to this system? When can we integrate this? Some were basically asking if they could sign up on the spot. That was the click.
That difference in reaction is everything, isn't it? You're not looking for polite feedback, like, that's nice.
No, feedback is often misleading. You're looking for reactions. Did they lean in? Did their eyes light up? Did they try to grab the mouse? Did they ask practical questions about using it now? That involuntary behavioral signal tells you you've hit on something real. And really, that completes the whole system, the whole loop. You lock down your strategy, your founding hypothesis in that intense 2-day foundation sprint. Then you immediately test that hypothesis with realistic prototypes in short, week-long design sprints, those tiny loops.
You watch for those real reactions, adjust your hypothesis based on what you learn, iterate quickly.
Exactly. And only when you get that strong, positive reaction, that unmistakable click from your target customer, only then do you commit the major resources to actually building and scaling the finished product.
It makes so much sense, clearing away the chaos, the guesswork, the wasted effort. But it feels like the real benefit here isn't just, better odds of commercial success.
I think you're right. It's deeper than that. When you apply this kind of intense focus, when you clear away the assumptions and the internal politics, and you truly put the customer's real problem, their real pain, at the absolute center of everything you do,
You end up doing better work.
you end up doing your best work, meaningful work, because you're genuinely focused on solving something worthwhile for someone else. And ultimately, that's how you make a contribution that matters, beyond just the bottom line.
A powerful thought to end on. Find the pain, build the hypothesis, test for the reaction.
Now go find your click.
Factoring can meet the cash needs of small businesses struggling with tariffs. Contact Chris at Versant Funding to learn if your client is a factoring fit.